Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angela. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with Alexander Raskovic from the platform Realization. Realization presents science, philosophy, and knowledge about yourself and your environment freely and with integrity. With this knowledge, we strive towards a wiser world in full harmony and prosperity. And I love his works. I found it. I was like, this is a gold mine. He's got very professionally edited videos that are really easy for anybody who is new or anybody who wants to really refine their current knowledge. His website is realization.com. That's real, R-E-A-L-I, as in I, E-Y-E, and then Zation, SATION.com, and his channel is also Realization, spelled the same exact way, on basically most video platforms and different social platforms. You can look him up, and we're going to be really breaking down concepts. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'm glad to have met you as well, Alexander.
Thank you so much, Corey. It's an honor to be part of your great summit with its great endeavor, ending slavery, and there couldn't be a more essential theme.
It is. It's a daunting task, right? We were talking about slavery, and we really got to break down these concepts because, unfortunately, in today's world, a lot of people may not be able to define even simple concepts such as rights or freedom or property or slavery. So, if before we can define slavery a bit further, can we break down some of those precursors to build up to that, such as like property, for example?
Yeah, no, as you aptly mentioned, it would be judicious to start from a foundational point. I like to always start from that root, which is kind of related to a branch of philosophy that I promulgate in much of my work, which is epistemology.
Mm.
And this is from whence we shall move on towards the way out, so the way out of slavery. So, because if you want to know the way out, you need to know how and why you got in for starts. So let's start with what slavery actually is, the common associations people make upon encountering the rubric of slavery is one that usually entertains the ball and shackle precedent of slavery, the chattel slavery, if you will, that took place a few centuries ago. But we are still void of a definition because we are making an association with the precedent. But what makes the precedent actually slavery? If you want to understand slavery, you inexorably have to understand what property is. And now, what exactly is property? Physical property, just to start with that, is objective. It is not subjective. There are things that can be owned. There is such a thing as ownership. Like for instance, this here is my cup. I have acquired the glass cup and the substance that it contains rightfully, without stealing it and without harming anyone for it. I have acquired it with my own resources that I have acquired rightfully as well, without harming anyone for it. I obtained these resources with my own time and attention, which are my true currencies in life, if you will. I've spent a lot of time and I paid a lot of attention to acquire these resources. Thusly, I own them. I have given a part of my life in exchange for the possessions I now have to make it easier or more satisfying. I have done so by way of my own free will decision with my discretion, which is also my property, my free will, my freedom to make decisions, because choices bear consequences, and the consequences are subsequently and inevitably mine and mine alone to bear. If I choose to take in a substance then I am the bearer of the consequence.
Mm.
Because in this case, I am using another piece of property I own, which is my body. My physical body is a literal and figurative vehicle with which I experience the three-dimensional space-time reality with my five senses. And now I choose to make certain decisions, that could possibly bear positive results. Like I could choose to make decisions that are vital for my life, for my health, I should say, by adopting certain styles of living that could contribute to my health. And that's usually what most people would strive for. And there could also be decisions that could possibly bear negative results. And I will be taking a risk if I choose to engage those. It could be it could be by like inhaling drugs like cocaine, or by drinking beverages that contain high volumes of alcohol. If I am taking the risk whilst being conscious of it as a grown up adult, I am making that decision. My decision is my property. My body is my property. The resources I used in exchange for the beverage or drugs are also my property. Thusly, the substance I am taking in, that I'm taking in, is also my property. I am exercising free will with something that is also my property, my freedom. My freedom to make my own decisions and to experience life in its entirety, without confines, boundaries, and limits, because those are not applicable when you're talking about real freedom. Now, this is where it goes into the realm of beyond the rights that you actually have. Now, when someone else, another person who has the same rights to his or her own property, and comes along and demands that you conform your decisions to his or her liking, i.e., they are coercing you, they are forcing you to make a decision that you do not want to make, and this could be to force you to give them your money or some sort of physical item. And this we commonly know as we commonly describe this as stealing. Now, nobody has the right to steal, and every cerebral individual would not disagree with that. Nobody has the right to steal because you are taking something without permission. Now, permission is paramount. It is a requisite of peaceful cooperation, because when you want someone to make a certain decision, it is always theirs to make, because they bear the consequences, and consequences always transpire. Your volition is always your prerogative, because nobody else has any right to it but yourself. Now, when somebody else tries to force you to make a decision, when you resent to it, you do not want to make it, in other words, but they use aggression to make you do it, then they are attempting to take away your right to decide for yourself. They are trying to take away your property, your free will in this case. Now, let's name some instances, some examples. Now, coercion is one that we just mentioned, to the taking away of free will, which is theft. You cannot tell me what I have to put into my body, like a vaccine or some other relevant substance that I have a right to be dubious about. And I would like to endorse my video I made called "Are You on the Right Side?", which pertains to the vaccine situation and what I'm talking about now. But you cannot tell me what I should, or what should or should not enter my body, because because first of all, it is my body, and there are also my consequences. If that consequence happens to be a risk, it is a risk I have to consent to. A risk without choice is not a risk, it is assault. In the same way that forcing someone to play Russian roulette is assault, despite the fact that you're forcing them to pull the trigger, it is assault. Which brings me to assault, which usually follows coercion. You are taking the well-being or health of that person's body, their property, that does not belong to you to take, which is theft. Again, and some more instances like rape. You are transgressing upon someone's right to their own free will to sexually associate with whomever they choose. You are taking free will again. Theft. And trespassing. You are another instance. You are taking away the security of another being in their own personal living space that they also own and have acquired rightfully. You are stealing someone's ability to live securely in their space, which they use and actively own, and you are doing so without consent. So, we all acknowledge them as harmful deeds like rape, coercion, assault, trespass. Every cerebral individual would not disagree with that. Now, one should never conduct themselves in this way. And since we are talking about our rightful property that is being taken, that only ourselves as the owner have the right to, nobody else has the right to perform these deleterious behaviors. So, we are all equal, they say. We all have the same rights. If one person is not allowed to do this harmful action, which we all agree, we all have a rapport and mutual understanding. We have a broader understanding that we should not perform these behaviors. We all acknowledge them as being wrong. Now, we all, so at the basis, we all agree to that. Now, when we are talking about slavery, we are ultimately talking about duress. Slavery in its core can be encapsulated as the removal of choice and free will. The people with dark skin tones were not permitted to make decisions over their own property. All of the aspects of their property we just mentioned, their body, their free will, and ultimately their volition, the fruits of their own labor, which are tasks that they gave their time and physical and mental attention for in exchange. They gave a part of their life to perform those tasks. Thus, they were deemed to be owned by another person. Now, we know that this was wrong, as most people would not disagree. You go on the street, everybody knows slavery is wrong. But we only deem it wrong because the degree of which was so blatant and obvious. But in principle, slavery has never actually vanished. The degree has only been reduced to a less obvious predicament, if you will. And herein lies the key to understanding the very principle of slavery. In slavery, it doesn't require continuous physical violence to slaves being kept on a cotton field, on a plantation, for instance. They were forced around, and the slaves were not like forced around and whipped with a cat o' nine tails incessantly. What it does require is continuous duress. Duress is the state where beings are being kept in a continual threat of violence. People are being threatened with violence if they do not conform with the wishes of the master. So as long as they comply, no one is being harmed. So you are free to do as you're told. And in our situation, it appears as if people are free, but the dynamic is the same exact dynamic is taking place. You are free within the boundary conditions of authority as long as you don't start to question it. Now, authority over another being is slavery under duress. During the era when people with dark skin tones were held as slaves, it was readily observable that people were slaves. However, today it isn't necessarily readily observable that violence will be done unto you unless you continue to conform to the wishes of authority figures. And as we just established what our rightful and rudimentary property is in life, this is not the natural state of reality as it is supposed to be. It isn't. We aren't supposed to live according to the whims of another being whom is not less or is not more isn't more valuable than ourselves, I should say, because we own our body, we own our free will, and we own the fruits of our own intrinsic and rightfully acquired physical mediums of exchange. And that is why people have always sensed that something was wrong about the system. There was always this something gnawing at them. Intuitively, people have always been struck by this sense of dissatisfaction. And this isn't because people are inherently grateful, as the system often promulgates, as we'll talk about later, but people have been convinced that there is no problem in it. And instead of following that which they sense, they continue to live their lives casually inside of the boundaries of this system that they are living within.
Mm.
And, as soon as those gates, you could call them, of what you are free and able to do within the system, creep in more and more and more. At one time, you're free to do this, and the next time it's a crime, which is what we've experienced over the last couple of years. There is less room for you to do as you please because you have less room inside of this, the boundary conditions that are imposed onto you compared to the last time. And what that is when people essentially started seeing things clearly to an extent after these couple of years, and are being somewhat active in its mitigation, but not in its total abolition, which is why some people in the so-called truth and freedom communities have also become hesitant about these so-called endeavors of this very community, this so-called truth and freedom community. Many people have, really become confused somewhat, because many of these endeavors are like bringing about new political parties, etc. You see, I compare the last couple of years of more coercion than people were used to, and with people saying that they just want to go back to quote unquote normal, I compare that to going from like 2 whips a day to 7 whips a day. And what many people want is to just go back to 2 whips a day instead of 7, because 7 is just too painful. But to say no whips is where we should point our attention at if we are to change the world condition. But many people, especially to a degree in the truth and the truth and freedom communities, are loath to accept that very fact. Which brings us to our contemporary present predicaments in the aggregate, the world condition now. Now, what I want to get to is why people are yet so amenable, why people acquiesce to this condition of not having proper ownership over what you actually own. And everybody who is honest with themselves knows that if you choose to show resentment or dissidence against the face of authority, like governments and etc., violence will be done unto you. They will trespass. They will introduce themselves. They will welcome themselves into your home. They will assault you, confine you, and ultimately murder you if the resentment shows itself to be uncontrollable, which also reveals itself to be a very appropriate term, actually. Violence, as in violation. They are violating your right to your own property. All things that we all have no right to do, as we all agreed upon earlier, because we all have the same rights. Yet some people magically possess the right to do the very things that are actually harmful deeds. Why? What makes these people so special? And in truth, nothing does. They aren't called authorities for no reason. Authority contains the word author, so the writer of a scribble. And they write down scribbles, they make things up. And there is no fixedness to them. They are wholeheartedly arbitrary and are dependent on nothing more than the individual whims and people who believe in them. They are not based on true morality, like we've discussed before, not transgressing upon people's right to their own freedom, the right to decide over their own body, their own choices, etc., living in harmony with one another. Yet the very essence of a government is nothing but the aforementioned violations. They do not come along and make voluntary suggestions for you to consider with your judgments, addressing your take on the situation, trying to give you your stance on the situation. They use they come, they make demands, and one cannot choose to demur or refuse such a demand, lest incurring violent outcomes. And that's all they do. And vast amounts of people comply because they don't want to have any violence done unto them. And, of course, this is the mindset that one has to, quote unquote, that one has the quote unquote moral obligation to comply, unless you're a bad person or you're a criminal. And this is all that waylays the total abolition of slavery. And the reason why abolition has eluded humanity has to do with manipulation, obviously. And I'm not the first and the last to state this, obviously. But allow me to clarify what I mean by that, by, manipulation as the culprit, as the main culprit. Manipulation has to do with the psyche, as many would agree. So let's talk about our psychological elements, which the system seeks out, in order to make us more complacent in the face of blatant immorality. And if we just understand ourselves and know the purpose of our own psychological elements thoroughly, we might realize that the slavery also takes place somewhere else, which is in our mind. Now, people have become ensconced in this binary reductionist way of looking at the world, of there being this dichotomy, if you will, between something that is inherently good or inherently evil. Now, I beg to differ on that, because such is not the case. There is a purpose for our psychological elements to exist. Like, let's name a very prominent one, the ego. Understanding the ego has to do with its purpose. Ego has a purpose, an inherent, intrinsic purpose to our existence. The reason for ego to exist is it understands its own individuality and uniqueness from everyone else. Excuse me. And understands that one is not just part of a group or merely a cog in a machine. It helps to remind you of the fact that you are special. You're not just like everyone else. If it wasn't for the ego, then we wouldn't actually understand their own sovereignty and the fact that nobody can control you and reign over you according to their own individual whims, but that you govern yourself and you are your own leader. That's its purpose, to prevent us from limiting ourselves within the boundaries of collective thinking, of collectivism, thinking that the group is more important than the individual. It is protecting our uniqueness. The understanding and the acknowledgement of our uniqueness is from whence all our unthinkable capabilities, if you will, that's where they bear fruit. Beyond a fear of being disapproved by the rest, because many people eventually start to look for approval. Now, the ego helps to remind you that you don't need anyone else's approval. That is why culture and institutionalized ostensible religions condemn it, because it doesn't want you to express your uniqueness so that you understand that you're not bound by limits. And you can achieve everything you wish to acquire, everything that you aspire to. They want you to conform. They want you to always look to the approval of the herd, so that a few people can more easily control the many, and so that you can become more predictable instead. Because they fear what you can become ultimately, because they know what you're capable of achieving. And if that expresses itself, their control system would absolutely perish. And, but once it's not, this is where we come into purpose, having a purpose or doing something it's not supposed to be doing, deviating from its purpose, being used for a different end than it was intended for. But once it is not exercising its purpose, once the ego is run amok, It tries to find purpose only for its own self-preservation and for what it can gain for itself. This is what the ego is very prominent for, like the me mentality. But this isn't actually the purpose of ego. It's actually doing something it's not supposed to be doing. The ego should not be viewed within the binary reductionist confounds of being either good, inherently good, or inherently bad. When we start to exceed, when we start to look beyond that limited view of the world, we see it for what it truly is. If it's fulfilling its purpose, or if it's doing something it's not supposed to be doing. And then we start to look at things not in terms of preservation or eradication by its seeming malevolence or benevolent nature, but in terms of solving and redirecting, or letting a puzzle remain unsolved. And if we are to redirect it to its true purpose, which is to help people recognize, like I like to break down words. And if we break down the word recognize, we see re as in a repetition, again, and cognize, cognition. To recognize, to cognize again that nobody can control you and reign over you according to their own individual whims, that you govern yourself. You are nobody's slave. You are nobody's property. You own yourself. And another one is pride. And pride also has its purpose. Culture teaches that pride is an unwarranted valuation of self. We've all heard this. But you are a being of unlimited value, so such an erroneous postulation is inherently infeasible. And this is the brink of it. Pride is condemned by culture because culture does not want people to understand how much they are worth. It purposely confounds the meanings of pride and conceit, and those are not to be used interchangeably, because conceit is believing that you are more valuable than others, and all people have infinite value, once again. So to be conceited is to degrade the value of those around you. And we have a very nice precedent of this: authority. Authority is the ultimate conceit. It lays people low lest they believe that it is they and not the law which has value. Like Jeremy Locke, the writer of The End of All Evil, lavishly put it. And pride is an understanding of your worth. Culture condemns it in order to suggest that you are really not of sufficient value to do, say, or accomplish things that you desire, like freedom and understanding your worth and the things that you want beyond the limitations of privileges within the system. And pride offends others because they have been taught by culture their entire lives that they have little or no value. They are vexed by the misunderstanding that prideful people are better than they are. And they are taught that pride is conceit, which is not, and nobody who's actually prideful actually thinks like that. I just understand, I recognize my own worth. I don't see myself as higher than anyone else. And if people were not so easily swayed by the doctrines of culture and religion, they would recognize that all people have equal and infinite value. When they see the pride of a person who has faith in themselves above that of their own, they would rejoice. If a prideful person has great value, then so do they. Culture condemns pride in order to make you amenable, like we just mentioned, and complacent with the demands of self-proclaimed authority figures. And your pride is righteous. It is justified because you are a sovereign. You are a sovereign being. You are not a slave. And, let's define sovereignty, because I think that's very pertinent to the current discussion as well. Like, sovereignty has an etymological root. And many researchers have actually addressed this, but I really want to emphasize the actual importance of it, because it really reveals the true definition of what it means to be sovereign. It comes from the Latin word super, which means above, usually something that is above something else. And reign, we see the word reign, which is derived from regnum, Regnum as in rulership and control. You stand above reign, sovereign, super reign. You stand above that which wish that the things that desire control and power over you. And that's the true definition of sovereignty, and you are a sovereign. You see that there is this theme going on that you can quote, declare your sovereignty. And we've all heard about this, and that by way of doing certain rituals and vague procedures you can become sovereign, which is a whole load of bunk, because you are a sovereign, and no person and no ritual can grant you that, because it is inherent to your very existence. You are a sovereign, period. Now, they want you to think of yourself as lower than their own system. This is why it's so... this is where this notion comes from, actually. And of course, look, that doesn't mean that I wholeheartedly oppose this movement of, knowing your ways around the system and knowing what to say and actually to circumvent it. I'm just trying to explain that it is merely a means, but it is not the end. The end is the total abolition of slavery in its totality, and not just knowing the jargon that could help you circumvent its effects on your own life within the confounds of authority. Well, it's actually omnipresent. And that's what pride and ego were built for. They help you remind yourself of the fact that that you don't need to go through all of that. I'm not less than some system and bound by it. I, as a free individual, am much more than the system. And no system can grant me permission to do anything. I don't need permission to be free. I don't need approval, because I govern myself. You don't own me. That's what pride is for, and that's what ego is for, and that's why they want to denigrate that. And and for something, Corey, I'm sure you've heard of this, and you're familiar with this. It's something that stands in the way of wanting freedom and abolition in the aggregate, collective freedom and freedom for everyone instead of for individual groups, not only for ourselves, but for everyone, for the entirety of life on Earth. And that is a characteristic that is also being denigrated by this system, and that is care, our sacred feminine, if you will. Our sacred feminine attributes of caring about our fellow in this sense. And in the same way, the ideology of social Darwinism, that's the ideology, the poison worldview that is promulgated by modern culture. It is with the intent to destroy your care for other individuals, because it denigrates such an inherent characteristic, care, as being a weakness. You're weak if you care about others. You have to. If you have to tread over other people, then so be it. If you have to tread over other people to get to where you want to, so be it. Because there are no rules in the world of in the Darwinian paradigm, the social Darwinian paradigm, if you will. And in fact, the world would go into the abyss if people don't care about each other and don't seek to live in harmony with each other, as it is doing now. And the idea that you have the right to tread over others to achieve your own goals is wicked. I already mentioned that one of my videos, I mentioned that an idea is akin to a virus. Now, consider the etymology of the word virus, which is the Latin word for poison. And that is the idea of social Darwinism. It is a poison in the mind that has caused tremendous amounts of suffering, the idea of social Darwinism alone. So to reconcile with these characteristics that make us who we are is paramount, because it has to do with the freeing of the mind, if you will. The freeing of the mind is what is paramount here. If the mind is free, the body will prevail. because we outnumber them by vast amounts. Hence why they need to keep us anchored in this depriving state of self-contradiction, which in turn leads to self-loathing. And slavery isn't really a physical prison. It is those, well, it is to those who are aware of it, of course, but it is largely a it is a mental prison in principle. The slave masters and their henchmen couldn't possibly enslave such a large number of people if the people didn't believe that they were rightful slaves and property of other people, that they had a moral obligation to obey someone else's decrees over their own life, that their own property was also someone else's property, and they could decide what you can do with it and take it away from you if you don't conform to their own will. There were these surely if people know the works of Frederick Douglass, there were these ideas during the epoch of slavery that postulated that you steal yourself from the master if you wanted to be free, and that you were too prideful and too arrogant and egotistic if you ever wanted to be free. If you ever wanted to steal yourself from the master, imagine that. The same way they manipulated people up here in the mind by destroying and disassociating people's connection with their true worth, what their true value actually is intrinsically, which in turn causes them to estimate their worth in cahoots with the estimation of this, the estimation the system gave you of your worth, which leads them to deem themselves with low self-esteem. And the only way to get out of that state is to gain self-respect. Now, self-respect, many people have heard of green language before, and I really like to apply that here, because self-respect really is the perfect example to apply the rules of green language, because self, refers to yourself, evidently. And respect, you can break down respect into two fractions. Re, as in again, as we just said with cognize, recognize, recognize. So in this case, we have re, again, and then we have spect. Well, what do we recognize spect in? Spectate, as in to look at something. It is also derived from spectare in Latin, which literally means to look at something, to view. So if we combine them all together based on the green language, we see self-respect, to look at yourself again, to view yourself in a very different light, to understand your true value in this sense. So that's actually, what pride and what ego were actually really designed for, and that's really what should be understood in this respect.
Wow, man, you covered so many great topics. It's just unbelievable. But it's like so many themes are coming to mind when you were talking about this, and we can tie it into so many other concepts that are crucial to understand, but you really simplified it for people. So something that came to mind when you were talking about ownership and property was responsibility, which I think
Yeah.
is very similar to this whole notion of, well, you are in control of you, so you have to be responsible for something that you own, and sort of responsibility for the truth, and you sort of correlating morality with truth. Not just morality just based on somebody's whims or what somebody thinks to be right, but based on reality. The fact that I can only breathe for me, you can only breathe for you, I own me, you own you, for example. And Frederick Douglass, and like you said, a lot of them talked about this. It is no coincidence I've also documented abolitionists from that time period that understood slavery in the totality. Henry
Yeah.
Clark Wright said slavery is, this involuntary subjection, basically, subjection to the will of another human being. And he would then apply that not just to the physical slavery that was happening at the time, but to the other forms of slavery that were also happening at the time. Lysander Spooner said after the Civil War there were political, social, economic slavery occurring. And so for these abolitionists to say that implies that there's more to just being ball and chain, physically enslaved on a field in a plantation because of your skin color. It's more than that. It's an act, it's a condition that can take hold of humanity and has taken hold of humanity over how many thousands of years across every culture, across every country, not limited to just one. So for you to mention this and to break it down, I think it's a historic moment, frankly. And for you to talk about boundaries, I think that is an important concept because you can look at unhealthy boundaries and healthy boundaries. Of course, when we were looking at the context of boundaries, we were looking at like, well, we aren't restricted. As human beings, we have the potential, right? So like we have the imagination to envision a better world in the future. But if we are in fear of freedom or in fear of that potential, then we will never reach it. So that imagination sort of gives way into our care to envision that new reality that we want to create. But if we have boundaries that are restricting our potential and our value, as you said, then we can never achieve that freedom or that goal, that purpose, as you mentioned, right? But then
Exactly.
healthy boundaries, if we're looking at boundaries in another sense, would be, well, I own me, you own you. Again, so I would not breach upon you. I would not do something that would violate your rights. Hence, again, violence or theft or slavery. Golden rule is another thing you mentioned, right? How it's like, how would you like it if you were treated this way? You're treating someone this way. Well, how would you like it if you were taught, affected the same exact way as them? So the golden rule was taught across every single culture, every single tradition. But do we apply it? Do we understand how
Exactly.
we apply it in our day-to-day life? So I thank you for connecting these topics together because it's one that humanity has to understand, right? Is it hard to understand that people own themselves? I mean, I feel like people generally already have a sense of that, do they not? Or they have a sense of understanding the golden rule is true. So why do they make an exception to that? Why aren't they applying that in their life?
Well, I've actually talked about that in the past, and it has to do with the first thing you mentioned, which is responsibility. Many people, responsibility actually, it also has a very nice green language to it. If you break down the word responsibility, it would actually come to you as response ability, your ability to respond. And that is something, you responding for yourself, you using your voice, the power that the power of the voice to answer for yourself and to decide for yourself. This is being delegated in the form of voting and delegating rights to external authority figures, because what does that do? It actually gives them a feeling of relief, being relieved of a burden, which is responsibility, the fact that you have to be a grown-up in the physical reality. And to mention responsibility goes actually hand in hand with voting, because in the Netherlands, where I live, the word for vote is stem, and stem, incidentally, in Dutch means vote. So to vote is to give away your voice,
Hmm.
to give away your responsibility. So it is actually uh, encoded in the very words we speak. Only
Okay.
those who are really conscious of it actually can translate them and actually see how either synchronistically or either intentionally, how we are actually being told like you're actually being fooled. And not only are you being fooled, you're choosing to be children instead of actual grown-ups by abdicating personal responsibility. And this would imply that people would have to take care of many of the things like that they usually let other people do. But the excuse for actual like abolitionism, the reality that everybody owns themselves and that we just nobody can rule over other people by means of duress and coercion and violence. True freedom in that sense. Nobody, if people were to actually be in that situation, people actually antagonize. How could I say? Um, People antagonize the idea of a reality without authority, without the borders that they are used to. And the things that they actually say are akin to like, well, we need to have structure, we need to have we need to have some sort of means of how could I say, like, cooperation and all of that. Okay, I agree. We need to have structure and cooperation, but how do you go from that to violently dominating everybody
Right.
by, taking a subset of people and giving them societal permission to rule the rest and give them the right to use violence and coercion to get to have people conform to their will?
It's the only
How would that
structure they know.
Yeah, exactly, and that's really the inculcation of an idea that is just, like that, like many abolitionists have said in the past. And the idea that with void of pride and void of having that self valuation, people think of themselves as, this is all I am worth. I'm not worthy of being a truly free, and being this is the worth that has been given to me is that I'm a citizen. I'm a proud citizen of this country or that country, and I need to do as I'm told. That's like the only world that they've been given, because that's the very short-sighted view of themselves, the short-sighted estimation they have of their own value, which in turn causes them to actually, not be able to actually. Well, obviously, there's a lot of people who get out of that eventually, but for the people who are there now, they are afraid of change. They're afraid of having changes in their own lives. The thing about comfort is the outcome is always predictable. Every day is predictable. People love they love it when things are, you can see the outcome. They love it when they see it coming.
Thomas Jefferson said peaceful slavery, right? Rather than dangerous freedom.
Exactly. Well,
So,
you could actually many prisoners actually develop a dread of being freed after being imprisoned for like decades. So when they actually
wow.
get freed, they do actually commit crimes with the very intent of being imprisoned again.
Yeah.
And as we've just mentioned, even slaves develop a dread of being freed, because all their lives they have been taught not to follow their own conscience, not to follow their own discretion, but to defer to the discretion of some external authority figure. Hence, the inevitable outcome is that they will actually, well, what do I do now? I don't have any experience of actually exercising my individual discretion and judgment, and my competencies, actually developed competencies to be efficient in real world tasks that require real world responsibility.
Yeah.
People have always been cared for by some external paternal figure, like a father figure, you could say, or mother figure, a substitute mother or substitute a surrogate father or surrogate
Mhm.
mother.
I want the
And
army to protect me. I want,
yeah,
I want the handouts. I want the this and that. And
yeah, you have
you see that.
then you have the two nodding dogs again, like the conservatives and the liberals. Like, you're either what, and this is like the false. I discuss a lot of logical fallacies as well, and this is like the false dichotomy fallacy. Like, I call it binary reductionism, actually, because it's really like, if you're not one, you're the other. So you're talking. This is why all those weird, vague things come about. Like people like you and me being like right extremists. We're overly into the Republican paradigm. Like on the right side of the political spectrum. When you and we don't adopt any political system, but still, people view this false dichotomy of, oh, if you're not pro-government, then you must be, which is viewed within the confines of you being a left winger, then you must be a right winger. Then you must be a Republican then, or you just must be on the right, the right side of the political spectrum. But they don't view
Boundaries.
anything exactly. They don't view anything as being as something being anything beyond that.
Yeah.
Beyond boundaries of political, like you've either this or that. It doesn't have to be that way. There is so much more. But then people, like many people have described the left brain, the prison of the left brain, and I would like to mention that because
Sure.
the left brain is responsible for structure thinking and systems thinking. So without the companion, the balancing of the right brain hemisphere, which actually sees things more, how could I say, in a generalizing fashion. It is able to generalize. It is able to, see things for what they are. Instead of what structures and system and categories have been placed. And with people need to have some sort of system how everything works. It has to go according to some system or structure. But they are void of the creativity of the right brain hemisphere that could actually generalize things and have more of an attachment to, living in the moment, living in the present moment, and actually using your own intelligent judgments. And this actually tangentially goes hand in hand what I'm saying about the left and right brain hemisphere, because many people say intellectual judgment, but I say intelligent judgment, because like intellect is an accoutrement of the left brain hemisphere. Intellect, like real, like logical thinking, and then you have the right brain hemisphere's generalization, and more like more of a generating fashion, if you will. So when we
Creative.
combine,
Yeah.
exactly, creative, and when we combine the two, we get intellect and gens, like generalizing and creating, as you've said, and then we combine the two, we get intelligence. So we have intelligence in the sense that we are able to think logically, we are able to assert whether a situation is true or untrue, we are able to express discernment and have real. We are competent at filtering truth from falsehood in that sense, and then we are also able to generalize possibilities. We are able to think of possibilities that could be possibly true, but you simply being open to the to more possibilities than than within the confines of what authority wishes to impose upon you.
Yeah. So I think a good example for the audience and for anybody who's listening out there would be your own personal experience, because that is something you would know best for yourself, right? And again, like all we would want, and I think, you and I are on the same page with this, we just want a world where we can get things done without slavery.
Exactly.
It doesn't sound to us like really hard of a demand, but because of the mental slavery, as you mentioned before, it's hard for people to see that it's occurring. And when people still do research on modern day slavery, you mentioned the jail system, that is an example of modern day slavery that some people are working to get rid of as well, because they see the jailing system as not actually helping people either. But it's a form of chattel slavery, and that's why they call it slavery. But they still don't look at the general picture or what really what slavery is, defining it, getting really clear like you did. So how about yourself when it came to understanding this greater understanding of slavery and statism is what we call it, right? Which is this belief in authority, the belief that somebody has the right to rule over you, that somebody has more special rights than everybody else, therefore making inequality. How did you get out of that belief system for yourself? And how long were you a statist, roughly?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I, as an estimation, I think, my process, I would like to, going into how long I was a statist. I mean, everyone who has gone through the established system throughout school and what have you not, and all the way to college and all the way to universities and what have you not, will always, end up being a statist one way or another. Well, it is actually the process of how long it took to go out of the status mentality, as you just mentioned. The idea that, this cognitive dissonance, actually, like people, we all have the same rights, yet some people have more rights than you do, and these are special, and that they actually have the right to do harm unto other people, and that it's legitimate in the sense that we should do harm, we harm, and the very things that, the very things that are actually create a peaceful coexistence, like freedom and all of that, or I should say the exact antithesis of that, like the very things that harm peaceful coexistence in society, like harm, trespass, stealing, that they can be good. And that's actually where it starts. It's actually a process of becoming honest with yourself, honest with what you've thought to be true, like what you've been taught, and what you've, you know espoused, and what things you've actually adopted as a paradigm, view, as a world view. And that has to do really with being honest with yourself. The first step of actually was actually to be honest with myself. When you reach eventually a certain point in life where, things that really are of insignificant value, like, material things, like this hedonist lifestyle of, becoming a famous scientist, or look at this. Did everyone see that I have a new car? No, like, it says, you go beyond this frivolous, mundane, limited way of valuing things in life, and you actually start to value things that actually have value. Like, this was my, inception into, the epistemological method, and also becoming an autodidact, actually, asking questions for a start. What is this reality actually? What is my individual worth? What is what is the foundation of this very idea of statism? What is the foundation? Why is it legitimate? And this went back to when I was questioning, like, royalty, because here in the Netherlands we still have royalty, and that's like the first thing I encountered. Like, who gave you the right to actually govern me? As you look like a regular guy to me, so what gives you this special intrinsic right? Well, my ancestors had that right, and they also had the right to govern you. So I am their offspring. So therefore,
Faith.
I have the right to exactly. And then you see all these blatant logical fallacies present within this very system of authority in general. So then you go into government as well, like a piece of that little a scribble on a piece of parchment, actually really means anything by way of, having gone through some various rituals and what have you. It seems very obviously that it is it seems more like a religion to me. And eventually, you go into seeing, if you actually just, view things from up above and not view things within the limits of your own interpretation, when I was still, programmed, if you want to call that. And if you just if you're just honest with yourself and actually view the things around you for what they are, generalize things, like, what is the foundation for all of these things? What is the foundation for governments? What is the foundation for royalty? What is the foundation of, the other various theories that have been promulgated throughout the ages? And if we just go to the foundation, I've said once in one of my videos that if you go to the foundation, you will actually see that none of these assertions have any feet to stand on. And thus it brings back the notion of having a solid foundation, because they don't have a solid foundation. It's like a house of cards, tripling over. that they don't have any, there is no substantiation to their foundation. There is nothing legitimate to it. And of course, this has a very large background to it. But just to keep it concise, Corey, not to explain my whole life story here, but actually trying to emphasize the very core of what made me actually reconsider what I once thought was legitimate, which is statism and authoritarianism, and that is being honest with yourself, looking at things for what they truly are, learn discernment, learn the trivium, learn logical fallacies. Logical fallacies. I was very, a logical person when I was a lot younger. So I, was very intrigued by logic, logical fallacies, and trying to filter information by way of these implementing these logical fallacies. Well, logical fallacies galore when we're actually talking about the system of government. If you're honest with yourself, if you're not going to justify in your head, well, oh, there should be a reason for that, like being honest with yourself, that is the primary head starter for this journey into understanding what nature actually is, what our nature is, what the world actually is, and how it all falls together.
Mm. Yeah, and sort of when you were saying like being honest with yourself, what comes to mind is that idea of conscience, right? Which we say that we have and that each individual should express, but are we using our conscience to decide what is right and wrong on a day-to-day basis, or are we suppressing that to order follow, to just go with the commands of a political authority? So really good points. Thank you so much for sharing all this great information and breaking down all these concepts. Where could people find a lot more of your works if you want to share all your channels with everybody?
Sure, thank you so much, Corey. Yeah, I have the main place where people recognize me is on YouTube, which is my YouTube channel is called Realization, as the logo states right here, and it's very convenient to have this logo here actually, so you
Yeah.
don't have to actually spell it. But it's like real eyes as in genuine eyeballs, and Asian, and people will find me there. They can also find me on Odyssey with the exact same name. They will be able to find me on BitChute, and they will be able to find me on Rumble as well, and they could also visit my primary headquarters, if you will, which is my website, realization.com. And if I could just end with some words of encouragement,
Please.
based on like what we've said, like pride and ego, don't cut them out. Pride, which is the pride will build courage, which is what the entire truth and freedom community, so-called, is actually largely devoid of in my in my viewpoints. Like which is actually, understanding pride will build courage, because you're not going to view the people, the quote people in authority, you're not going to view them all the way up here. You're going to view them down here, because that's what they are. Actually, they are actually, obviously, when we're talking about the conscience of these people, they are less than what a genuine human being actually is in terms of morality and philosophy. I mean, actually, just have you seen these people? Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, do I need to go on? I mean, look at them. Are we to be discouraged by their authority? Are you having a bloody laugh? So, that's why they have to break your inherent pride, to make them to make you view them up here when they're actually very low individuals. And ego, stand with it. When you know you can achieve something, then you do it. You can achieve everything you wish to aspire to. It will build motivation. True healthy ego will build motivation. People will be motivated and steadfast in this road towards true freedom, because they know they can achieve it. Don't think don't think you can. Know you can. And lastly, care. You have to care about freedom. And obviously, this is more personal, but largely people today care more about comfort And this comes back to what we just said about responsibility and what have you not. But they care more about comfort than freedom. But once again, when you know that you are worth more than a slave with just privileges that can be taken away from you and given to you at the behest of someone who claims to own you, you will know that you will not be treated like that. You are worthy of true freedom and not just privileges that are granted by slow-witted idiots. Freedom is your birthright, so don't let them, as the famous aphorism goes, don't let them tread on you.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's Alexander Raskovic. Thank you so much. Realization, everybody check out his works. Like I said, really good, detailed information. He's got videos really well professionally edited and very simple to the point on many different topics. You even go into the trivium and that learning method of how we can understand how to think to begin with and how to critically think. To go even further, you go into viruses and germs, and you've talked to doctors. You've done all sorts of really good information that I think people can also look into aside from this. And so, thank you so much for joining me, Alexander, and thank you everybody for watching. Take care. This is the end of Slavery Summit. This is Corey Angelat here with Alexander Raskovic. Take care.